Closed captioning is available. You can see at the bottom of your screen, it should either say closed captioning, or if you click more, it'll say show subtitle or view full transcript or live transcript. There's lots of options there for the closed captioning and subtitles. Please put all your questions and answers in the chat. This slide is incorrect, so we're going to be using the chat today since this is a meeting and not a webinar. And if you have any technical concerns or issues, I can help you troubleshoot those in the chat. Next slide, please. So just a couple of quick notes about the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, NADTC. Our mission is to promote the availability of accessible transportation options that serve the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and communities. Next slide. We provide technical assistance and training, publications and resources, partnership coordination, and community grants and coalitions. Next slide, please. And that is enough of hearing from me, because I'm going to get out of the way for Mr. Ken Thompson with NADTC. He's our Technical Assistance Director, and he will be taking us through the rest of today's presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ken. And you are muted, my friend. Bear with us for just a second while we get Ken unmuted. While Ken's working on that, I will just talk through this slide here. Just a quick reminder, NADTC strives to provide accurate information on the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. But what we provide is technical assistance and not legal advice. The information, whoops, he skipped my slide. Come on, Ken.
Back.
There he is.
Got it back. It all disappeared for some reason. I'm
right.
good.
You're good. We can hear you. I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. I disappeared. So trying to figure out what was happening. But just remember, reasonable modification to policy. I want to welcome everybody. Get back into kind of talking who I am, Ken Thompson. I have been with Easter Seals for a number of years doing ADA and transportation. I'm a male with dark hair, wearing a work at home blue blazer and a blue shirt. So anyway, it's one of my favorite topics, reasonable modification of policy. And it's something that we all have to do no matter what kind of transportation we provide. So it applies to fixed route, demand responsive transportation, private shuttles, complementary paratransit, and it requires a local process that's set by you if you're a transportation provider, or if you're working with transportation providers or using a transportation provider. It's the transportation's provider's policy. So, you know, people say, oh, reasonable modification. The ADA says, well, yes, it does say certain things, but the actual policy on the reasonable modification is one done locally by the provider. So it's something that most transportation providers are already doing in some form, in some way. And a lot of times that's just the way that you respond to people who ride with you or have questions or may ask or request certain types of service. And it's just how you look at those requests and handle those. So that's something you might do. So the DOT rule for reasonable modification have been around quite a while. It's effective 2015 in July. And it's for all the transportation parts in the rule, parts 27 and 37. And it says that transportation entities are required to make reasonable modification and accommodations to policies, practices, and procedures to avoid discrimination and ensure that their programs are accessible to people with disabilities. And really, the point is that, you know, you can have ways of doing things, and we'll get into details, but you're going to be thinking about ways that you're going to make transportation happen. You know, it's really about how can I assist you? And that's kind of why we got the title that we have at this point. So in those rules I just mentioned, just remember, if you look that up, Appendix E to the reasonable modification rule for transportation is helpful if you want to look at different kinds of situations and examples. And you're just using this as guidance for your reasonable modification decision. You know, you're going to look at your situation, you're going to look at some of these examples and kind of say, hey, you know what, this kind of sounds like mine, and here's our approach. And that guidance basically is helping you see that, you know, is this reasonable in the way you provide service? Is something that you can do? So those examples are a good place to start when you're considering certain types of requests or issues. And it's really some general guidance to frame your thinking. I always recommend too that providers have a reasonable modification statement somewhere in your literature. And that's a general statement that represents your position on providing your reasonable modification to your riders. And that statement really is a way that will affirm that you take reasonable modification as a normal part of doing business to ensure that people with disabilities can get services that's accessible. So one of the statements I kind of came up with, I think is kind of general, but it's a helpful way of doing it. Say, having a statement that says something like, we provide reasonable modification of policy and practice upon request to ensure that our transportation services are accessible to people with disabilities. So it's kind of a broad general statement, but that kind of frames your organization and your approach to reasonable modification. And I say, put it on your website, on your applications, documents, meeting materials, and you know, keep that in mind even when you do training for drivers, staff, and mechanics. Just let them know that this is a key part of why and how we provide service. And you must provide reasonable modification to policy unless it would fundamentally alter the nature of your program, your service, or activity. So it would be a big change. We'll get more into that. Or it would be a direct threat to the health and safety of others. Or this interesting statement, without the requested modification, the individual with a disability is fully able to use your service, program, or activities. From the disability perspective, really, it just says that person really quite didn't need this modification. They can use the service as it exists. Fundamental alteration of service is the point where the modification being requested is so significant that it alters the essential nature of how you provide services. And this is the general disability statement of it. So it would be with goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, etc., or accommodation. And so the decision that you make must explain and demonstrate that modification would fundamentally alter the nature and how it would alter it. And you know, your decision could explain that, you know, this is something we just can't do within the way we provide service, and that you're not required to make that big change because of that tremendous modification of your service. So that alteration of service is so extreme, that's not possible. It's case by case for your decision. So each individual person, when they make a reasonable modification request, that request should be taken in its own merits as you receive it and what the person requests. And then also a key part of that case-by-case decision is a process where you have communication to discuss the needs of that rider. So say, hey, what do you need? How can we help you get your ride? So have that discussion. So the case-by-case part is really communicating and discussing the issue. So a person may request something, but always follow up with a discussion with the person to find out what are they really needing to make sure that some form of transportation could be provided or it could not be provided. So it's really about trying to fill in those gaps of accessibility and providing good customer service and being flexible. And so, like we've titled this session, you want to consider how may I assist you as your approach and your perspective in the discussion, rather than saying, oh, you know what? Yeah, you said that, but we just can't do that. When you're getting into it, we can't do it first, you're not really exploring and discussing, some alternatives where you could provide service in a way that would not be a big adjustment or alteration in what you're doing now. Now, there's process guidance that's really required for you when you do reasonable modification, is that as transit agencies, we should review and track our requests for reasonable modification and have a listing and notes. It could be a spreadsheet where you can see, how do you handle requests. So there's got to be some form of tracking and some policy in how you handle the request made by the person and the follow-up communication. Appoint a single person. We could be your ADA coordinator or some other staff that you say is your person that will lead the reasonable modification effort and take the request. And have a formal process for responding to these requests. So you got tracking, you got review, but the process for responding should be fairly systematic, where first thing you would do when you get a request is to contact that individual and have a discussion to find out what they really need in the requests that they have made. Because some people may say they need a certain kind of transportation. And then in the discussion, you might say, but you know what? I hear what you're saying, but we also could provide something a little bit different, meaning that somebody may request they want, example I'm thinking is they want a van to go behind the house, pick up the person in a very narrow alley. Well, you can talk to that person and you might say, you know what, we can't get a van in the alley because it's tight, it's difficult, and it could be a hazard. But what we can do is we can adjust where we pull up in front of the house, and we'll have the van located right at the driveway, and we'll have you come out of the house and come down the driveway, and the van will be right at the entrance of the driveway for boarding. And that could be, a way of looking at a request, but I'd like to give an example right off. Complaint procedure. Complaint procedure is really a key part of the ADA, but also is a key part to reasonable modification requests. So you got reasonable modification requests, but also the complaint procedure. It's a way that also informs you if someone is looking for some adjustment in service. So the complaint procedure can feed into your reasonable modification process. So someone may have complaint about getting service or how they're getting service, but through that complaint, you can talk to the person and say, hey, you know what? I know you have an issue here, but we can offer you service with certain adjustments. So it's kind of similar, but that complaint procedure kind of goes in hand. It's also interactive. And just like reasonable modification requests, the complaint procedure should also include interactive communication, follow-up communication, and a record of that communication. And the requirement basically is that complaint issues are the original complaint documents are contained for 1 year. So you have copies of those. And then complaints should be at least logged into like a spreadsheet or some other kind of basic format for 5 years, where you show the complaint, the kind of issue, and then how it was resolved. So that's kind of a good way of record keeping to see, what are you doing with complaints and how they're being resolved. But if you see certain issues or certain patterns, that will give you information on maybe places where you need more training for personnel. Or it could also say that, hey, you know what, we could kind of handle some of these issues in a different way by looking at it as reasonable modification requests. So it could be informative to you in those ways. So we've moved along to our point of this whole session. It's called the reasonable modification to policy questions. And what we're doing here now is we're giving you a time where you can ask questions, and you can put your questions in the chat section. Now we have it as the Q&A, but it's really going to be chat for this session. And then we can move ahead, get your questions, and I'll be here to answer them. And what I need to do is try to get and see the chat and see what we have. So anybody has questions, it's time to ask. I have a couple questions that I received ahead of time, so I'll get started on those. I got one that I got that says, what do we do about long driveways? They have someone that has a long driveway, and they want the provider to go down the driveway and get to the end to pick up the person. And the provider says, I don't know, we don't usually go down long driveways because that's not what we do. But the point is, you can have a policy, you have a long driveway, but you want to look at the situation. So someone might say there's a long driveway. We've had some providers that say, hey, we only go driveways no more than 100 feet. Well, that could be your policy. You could look at the 100-foot driveway, but then say, hey, somebody wants to go a little bit longer. You could look at it case by case. Say, yeah, that's close enough. You're going 120. That's okay. You could have a line that you draw and say, we don't go past a certain point. But the other considerations around long driveways usually is, are you going into a driveway where you have to back out of the driveway? That may be a situation where it's absolutely no, we don't back up. Or, you go into a long driveway, can you turn around at the end of the driveway where you don't have to back up? The issue of turning around a lot of times can be an issue of, are there obstacles there? Or will there be obstacles at certain times? There's situations where I know where people went down the driveway and it's a house, but it's also a shed. And beyond the shed, there's actually a barn. So it's a small farm. And they said, but once they get beyond the house to turn around, there is a lot of farm equipment, sometimes cars and other things in the way. So the situation, may be one where, yeah, at times you could turn around, but at other times, you may be in situations where it might be hard to navigate. So you still have to make that judgment yourself. And something I always add when you're thinking of driveways and going back and properties to someone's house, if you're using the lift, you want to make sure you're looking at the area where there's going to be boarding on the lift. So you're going to look at the area around the lift. When the lift is lowered, it's going to be firm, hard and stable, which is a requirement for that lift use. it's an area that's going to be reasonable for boarding. Some places, you have firm, hard packed gravel could be usable. In some other places, the gravel is kind of loose and is problematic, and you have to make that assessment when you look at that property. So it's one of those things. All right, let's see. Any questions yet? If you got a question, go ahead and put it up in chat. I got a couple more questions I had gotten ahead of time. I just got one this morning that was very timely, and we had a question where a person said they wanted to get it's a dial-a-ride transit system to operate beyond the normal hours of the transit system. So they actually got a request that the person needed the ride after the transit operation closed because of employment. And so the individual had said, hey, I need that ride because, my job is over at 10. The transit system closes at 9. And so in that case, the decision basically in that discussion is possibly, that would be a fundamental alteration of service. Your normal operating hours of your transit system, say in this case was 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. That's when you operate. To go beyond that, you have to make a judgment, but it could possibly be determined as a fundamental alteration of service because you're going well beyond your service hours. So it's a case where you can look at it, but you may want to talk to the person. Are there other alternatives, or are there other providers that could provide that trip that are operating at the time when you need the ride? So that situation just came in this morning. I hear one fairly regularly. We get people that request that they want a ride in a sedan when you have a service that has a few sedans for ambulatory people, but the majority of service is vans. But the person says, hey, I'd rather ride in a car. I always remember the story from several years ago where it's a lady who wanted to ride from an ADA paratransit provider, but she says, I would rather have a car show up at my apartment because it just looks better for a car to arrive. And in this case, you can't guarantee, and they had no system to guarantee that a van could arrive reliably every time. It's always mixed fleet. It's scheduled on routes of who's going to be providing rides to certain areas. And so in this case, reasonable modification requests of this sort could be denied because you can't guarantee getting a van there having a mixed fleet. So anyway, looking for any more in chat. If you have anything you want to put in chat here, go ahead. All right, here we go. Got one in here. We get several requests to alter the service area. Service area, let's think about that. Altering the service area would mean, say, I don't know what you're running, but even if you're running dial-a-ride, you may only go into certain areas. You may only go to certain cities. In that way, you have your service areas. That's kind of set up. It might be a little bit different if you have ADA paratransit. ADA paratransit generally has a requirement that you go no more than 3/4 miles outside the fixed route area. Any requests for ADA paratransit beyond 3/4 mile, if that's your normal policy or practice, could be denied, only in that would be a major alteration of service, meaning that you just can't do that reliably every time. And the point I'd like to make about things like that too, when someone says, let's alter service beyond the service area, you want to think about, if you do it for one person, you pick up that one person outside your service area, then you'd basically literally have to take your your map of your service area and expand it out to pick up all other people that make requests just outside the service area. Because if you do it for one and you don't do it for other people, then you would be discriminating of your service from other people that may request the same thing. So you want to consider requests beyond normal service would be a major alteration. All right, here's one here. All right, from Lisa, it says we get the same requests for sedans. We also have someone who insists they have to have the front seat of any vehicle, which we haven't accommodated because we can't guarantee the seat or order pickup. Yeah, that's actually a fairly common one where people say they want a certain seat. And your point is probably true, where if you can't guarantee that seat because someone else might be sitting in it, you can't say to someone else, hey, you got to move, this person needs front seat. You could say, yeah, we just don't do that because we don't have guaranteed seating or assigned seating. So yeah, that would be okay because you can't reliably do it every time for a person who makes that request. All right. How about another one here? We have one from Jane. It says a rider is highly sensitive to smells and wants a guarantee there won't be people wearing perfume during the ride. That's an excellent question. So we get a lot of times we get requests by people around multiple chemical sensitivity. So you got someone with perfume. The problem we have is we can't guarantee what people are going to do in a shared ride situation. A lot of times we will see providers recommend that people be aware of and sensitive to the fact that some people have issues with strong scents and perfume. And so they may say something to the effect that we request that you do not wear strongly scented perfumes, etc., while riding to be sensitive to the needs of others. But you can't guarantee it. So the point is, because it's shared ride, you can't guarantee it. You can't control everybody. The point is, you say, yeah, we'll do the best we can, but we can't guarantee that someone might not board or be on the vehicle with strong perfume. All right, from Wendy, how do you handle a situation where someone's weight, including the chair, are over the weight limit of the lift? That's another interesting one. Think about the weight limit of the lift. So that all depends. Your weight limit, if you have a 600-pound lift, the ADA minimum is that you handle the person and the wheelchair or mobility device that are up to 600 pounds. That's what the vehicle can handle. If you have a 700-pound lift, 800-pound lift, 800-pound is pretty common now, then you'll handle that. But if they're over the limit, the question would be, what is your policy by talking to maintenance people, operations people? In some cases where, 800 pounds is the limit, but I know providers that through reasonable modification say, our maintenance people say, well, we're going 820. We're going 825 on an 800-pound lift. We'll be okay with that. So you could make your own determination and judgment as to what you would handle. But there is no requirement that you go beyond that, the capacity of your equipment, because the point is you don't want to be damaging your equipment if you're going well past the weight limits on that lift. So, there are situations where providers have, kind of tweaked that just a little bit. And that is a local policy decision that's made in consultation with maintenance and with operations. All right, next question. Let's see. From Heather. Do you know a time when a request was denied because of the fundamental alteration of service and customer filed a complaint and the provider had to accommodate? Yeah, I mean, there's probably, I'm trying to think, there's, because it's case by case, somebody may get a denial, but then in follow-up, someone else within the organization or through other discussion, someone may say, yeah, you know what, we can do something a little differently. Sometimes, you know, you could deny based on your best judgment at the moment, but based on discussions with this individual who filed the complaint, and then sometimes with further discussion with operations people, with maintenance people, with others, you may say, you know what, we could provide this in a certain way. We'll come up with a way, and I'm trying to think of an example, but you could kind of say sometimes, you know, we'll do some adjustment, maybe in a little bit different way than we were first thinking at the time. So yeah, I mean, there could be situations that the first request was denied, but in follow-up through complaint, yes, a different action or result did occur after consultation. So yeah, that communication again with that customer could also lead to sometimes better outcomes when you're looking for alternatives. All right, Brian says, what kind of documentation is needed to show compliance with reasonable modification to policy? Well, the documentation is really what we could say local. Documentation is, you know, we generally like to see a form where it says there's a form that has the individual, the request, date and time, and part of that documentation then is follow-up. So the follow-up is communication with the individual. That communication would show additional information. So you had a conversation with the individual who wanted to have you drive down the long driveway. So the follow-up too is that, yeah, we're going to come up and look at your driveway and see what we can do. And you schedule the time. So you schedule the time a few days later, you get to the house. And the operations people look at the driveway, look at the turnaround situation. They look at the surface for the lifts and some other considerations. And maybe at the time too, have a conversation with the individual there as you discuss, you know, the different issues and the possibilities. So in that discussion, you may say, yeah, we could do that based on what we see here. We don't have to back up around a bunch of equipment. It's pretty clear in this driveway. It has sort of a loop turn that we can make. We'll do that. You may say to the person, if we come pick you up, you have to kind of make sure this area is clear so we can pull through rather than back up. And then we would say, yeah, we could do this. And the documentation says, yeah, we went out, assessed the situation, looked at it, and granted the request. Or the other hand, you could go there and look at it and go, no, we got to back up next to the house by the garage. And it's a real tight squeeze. We don't even know if we can do that very regularly or routinely or safely. And in that way you may deny it. But the documentation would show that. I know some transit systems are doing a good job too on complicated requests, where when they're going out and assessing things, they will take photographs of what they see and different issues, and then use those photographs as their backup for their requests and issues around that. So then beyond that is, yes, we did it. We granted the reasonable modification request. And the other thing is, no, we didn't, and here's the reason. And then just keep those kinds of records in place. But yeah, also those records can be brought out from time to time too for discussion with other people within the organization as far as part of training or even adjustment in policy and operations. All right, here's one from Edie that says, we have let them board separately from their scooter if able. Yep, that's a reasonable modification approach that can be done. You can talk to people, they can board separately because of weight and other issues, separate from the mobility device. So someone who's heavy, the mobility device boards, the person boards each separately, then you're within the capacity of the lift. That's up to the person. You can talk to the person and say, hey, would you consider boarding separately from your mobility device to make this trip? So that is something that could be a possibility with a heavy person. Now, in some cases, some people, of course, cannot stand, and that's not a possibility, but for the person that can ride the lift separately, then that's a possibility. All right, Raven says, how do you handle individuals in manual wheelchairs with excessive weight? We had several drivers injured to try and determine the best practice to still provide service, but not have drivers out on work comp. Yeah, it's actually a common situation where you have to kind of look at manual chairs, excessive weight. You make a judgment and determination what's reasonable. One thing we've had some transit agencies do is they've worked with operations people, and in some cases, even with someone on, moving that heavy mobility device and what's the best way to move it without getting injured as part of a driver's training. But on the other hand, you can come to a point where you say, hey, this is too much weight for one individual to handle. And that could be a determination based on your local policy and find that spot where you think, we don't want people injured. What happens is sometimes drivers say, hey, I tried to move it and I can't get it to budge. I'm going to injure myself. And that's something people would call into dispatch and say, hey, I'm making an attempt, but I can't really do it. What do I do? So that's a situation where you have to look at it, see what the alternative is. And in some cases, the manual chair with excessive weight possibly could not be handled by one driver. Far as reasonable modification, transit agencies are not required to provide a personal care attendant or another person to help push that individual. However, you could say, hey, would you consider to a person having someone help with you and your heavy chair to board? But you can't require that, but you could say, hey, would you consider that? That would be very helpful. And it's up to that individual as to what they want to do with that. But that can't be required. So. All right. Let's see. Shannon says, the public transit agency I work for set policies, this back to Raven, that drivers are not permitted to lift passengers' wheelchairs nor enter a passenger's home. So yeah, that's a reasonable policy. Let's see, Raven's responding. And here's another question from Jane. Someone asked to stop at the pharmacy, which is right along the route on the way home. And all that depends what kind of service you're providing. With ADA paratransit, some services in some communities will allow an intermediate stop at certain times. And they have that in their policies, but a lot of ADA paratransit, because of scheduling and other sites, operational concerns, will say that we won't make intermediate stops because it's disruptive to our schedule. So a stop at a pharmacy just wouldn't be possible. And that's really your own service and operational policy decision. And so, there's nothing that says you have to do this. But, that as reasonable modification, if you can't do that reliably and do it for everyone, then you could decide, oh, yeah, we just don't do that. But I know in some communities that are smaller and more rural areas where, people are going long distance trips, they actually have a general policy that says if someone requests a stop at a pharmacy, they'll honor that request. And they'll say it in a way that, that stop can't be more than a certain amount of time for the trip. In some cases, it might be 15 minutes. We'll do that, drop you off on the route. But in more urban areas with ADA paratransit, that's not reasonable to, in a way, to keep a schedule. The alternative we say to people that may need a stop is that, you can, if you're coming from a physician and you want to stop at the pharmacy, you can always book a trip to the pharmacy and then book a trip from the pharmacy back to your home. And that's just another way of handling it. All right, any more questions? We had some wonderful questions. Always looking for more good points of discussion. Just remember, these issues are all your issues with your transit agency and how you provide service. But think about, what can we do to make a trip possible for an individual first, rather than thinking about, oh, we just don't do that. What are some reasonable ways, such as Jane's question? One reasonable way, like I said, it would be to have the person book basically 2 trips. So one to the pharmacy, then getting picked up at the pharmacy to go home. Would kind of solve that issue, but it's really your policy. Let's see, I'm going to look at some other questions. I got one that I hear all the time is you have an issue where someone says, oh, I want the driver to wait with my passenger who has dementia just a little bit longer when I drop them off if no one's there. Well, could that actually happen? If someone, you're having a passenger with dementia, you get to a location, there's supposed to be a kind of handoff to a person, and there's no one there. Well, they request that, can you wait a little bit? Well, that really depends on what does wait mean and what's reasonable for you as a provider. So in some transit systems, they'll say, we'll wait 5 minutes for someone to come out. In the meantime, sometimes people will radio in or call in and say, hey, there's no one here. We need to get someone here. I can only wait 5 minutes. Then in that case, what we usually call a safe harbor policy comes in effect. The person stays on the van until someone's located. But someone might request, hey, this person's going to run a little bit late on this particular day. They're going to run, maybe 10, 12 minutes past the time I'd get dropped off. Can you wait just a little bit? And that would be a reasonable policy request that you would consider. Is that possible? Are you willing as an organization to say, we'll wait a little bit longer? What does a little bit mean? We're going to wait another 10 minutes or 12 minutes. You could say, we'll do that just for you. But if that is what you're going to do for that one person, you're going to say, we'll do that. But if it can't happen for other people reliably, if you get a bunch of these requests, then you would have to kind of make a judgment for your organization that we were just not going to do that to a lot of people, because that's going to have a big impact on our schedule. So it's really a decision as a provider to look at, how long your wait and what is reasonable for you. All right, it says, is this deck, slide deck going to be available? Yes, it is. We're going to have a recording. So we'll look for that when it's finished up, and then you'll have it available. So, all right. Oh, here's one that we get a lot, and it's pretty much a common situation anymore. It's food or drink on the vehicle. So a lot of times, you get on the vehicle, there's a sign that says no food or drink. Right. Basically, that's like very big no. And here's what we hear always. What about dialysis, right? So someone's coming out of dialysis. What do they come out of dialysis with? They come out usually with a drink, right? So when someone's leaving the dialysis center, the person is dehydrated. A lot of times they're not feeling so well, and they come out with a drink. And so really, in this case, wouldn't it be reasonable to think, yeah, we're going to allow food or drink when you're coming out of dialysis, because this is really something that you need to help you make your trip home. It's really kind of a health, safety, medical type of issue. And it's reasonable to say, yeah, have your drink. And so in most cases, it's something that transit systems do routinely, right? Coming out of dialysis, coming out of chemotherapy, coming out of some other kinds of medical situations, food or drink would be allowable. And another situation too is, we have people that have diabetes or some other chronic conditions where they need a little bit of a drink or a small snack. And if they're on the vehicle for more than 30 or 45 minutes. So, we say, yeah, just, case by case, let the person have their drink and small snack. And also, having people that need drinks. We have Shannon having a comment that says, when I do travel training, I encourage individuals to use only bottled water with a cap. Tell the driver that's for medical reasons. Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable too. And I know in some areas of the Southwest, I was doing a training there several years ago, but one issue they told me about was, in parts of Arizona, when it's 110, 112 degrees, people get dehydrated very quickly because the humidity is only 20%. And they've had people get on the van, and while they're sitting on the van, they've become kind of incoherent. And they said they've had people kind of droop over because they're dehydrated. And when it's hot, people have medical conditions, dehydration comes on very quickly. And so in those areas, they say, we just kind of waive our no food and drink on the van, especially if it's water. We say we encourage people to drink water at those times so that they don't become dehydrated. Thinking of drinks, I'll need one now. It's just tea. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, you want to have some fluids available for people that really need it. So good point. Let's see, how about solo rides? This is something we hear pretty often. We get people that say, I just want to ride alone. Now with COVID going on, that was a process used in a lot of places to isolate individuals from each other, for protection and safety for solo rides. But we have people that request solo rides and say, you know what, because of my issue, and we've had people say allergies, we've had people say, that they have a mental health issue and they can't be around other people. I just want to ride alone. Well, the point of this is when you provide public transportation, again, it's shared ride. You have a bunch of people riding together. Can you guarantee there's a solo ride, or are you in the business of providing a solo ride? The answer to that is no. You're probably not going to be providing solo rides, except like I said, during COVID, when that was your standard policy. But because shared ride is how you provide rides for efficiency, and that's how you operate. So it's just not something that would be reasonable to consider when someone requests a solo ride. We've also had people say, I'm not riding on any paratransit van when there's a dog on it, because they say I'm allergic to dogs. That's another issue. People may request it. I know in some situations people consider that to a point, but they say, we'll consider it, but we can't guarantee you on all your trips that there won't be a dog on the vehicle. Because sometimes, the service animals on, sometimes they say you can't guarantee that that the dog's not going to ride. on certain pickups because schedules get adjusted, schedules get moved around. But people will say, "We'll consider it, but we're not going to guarantee it." So you may see a dog on the ride, and we're going to say to you that that's not going to be a guarantee, and that's not reasonable. All right, another question we have. How about Jeremy says you have a rider who often misses their pickup or incurs a no-show. Can you talk about how to approach this situation or how to implement a suspension process? Yeah, big issue. So you get someone who misses their ride. And the point of missing rides is not to be punitive all the time. You first want to take it like we do with the complaint process. Talk to the person, find out what's going on. And if somebody misses a lot, we like to say, what's going on? What can we do to make you be available for your ride? You schedule these rides, but what's going on? In the morning, do you need a reminder? Sometimes people prefer that reminder the day of the ride. Some people say, oh yeah, can you call me an hour before? Some transit systems have reminders for people for their rides as part of their systems. Other systems provide reminders when requested. And there are other systems that will remind people when the vehicle is within 15 minutes of the pickup time. So that's, sometimes part of the discussion. But the other part is, if someone still misses and you've talked to the person, they still schedule rides, suspension really is your last resort because you want to think about suspension as being punitive for that individual in a way that it could be detrimental to their well-being. So when you suspend someone and they don't have transportation, it could be detrimental in that they can't get to work or they can't get to health services or they can't get to counseling or even in some cases connecting with families when public transportation is their only way of connecting with their family. So you want to say, what, let's think about being progressive in our no-show process. And we always say, suspension shouldn't be about the number of rides that a person misses, but it's really looking at the percentage. So if you got somebody that rides, say, twice a month, and if you had 3 strikes, you're out, right? And so 3 strikes, you're out, you ride twice a month, they miss a couple of times, third time, you're out, right? But if you got somebody that rides every day and then they spread out 3 misses over a long period of time, that percentage is way much smaller. It's not such an issue. But still, the issue is warning and discussion. We have a comment from Edie. But discussion is the real issue, and having it very progressive. Just being punitive at first. Some people get these warning letters and say they're going to be suspended without the discussion. And what people do a lot of times when they get a warning letter, they panic and go, look, I got this letter. It's so negative. And they've called me and they said, I got this letter. Here's what it says. And they'll read their letter to me. And then they say, so what can I do? And I say, well, contact them, have a conversation. They go, wow. Since they sent me this letter, I don't want to talk to them anymore because the letter was so harsh. So anyway, I bring that up only in saying that, if you do send out warnings, may provide language and opportunities where you can have discussions with that individual and where you're saying, hey, we want to talk to you to make it possible for you to ride rather than just canceling your service after, 2 warning letters. So anyway, just, keep in mind that there can be other reasons why people may be missing their trips. And you want to kind of have that discussion with the person to find out if there anything we can do to help them out. All right, we got a couple more minutes and then we'll be winding down. Any more questions? All right, I'm going to move on to some resources. And we'll tell you some resources that are good. The ADA circular from the Federal Transit Administration is good. It gives you some good examples and discussion around reasonable modification and how to implement it, and some good examples. So keep that in mind. And I just find it by doing the search, says ADA circular FTA, and it comes up as the first choice. And other resources, we have the TCRP Census 142 implementing the US DOT modification rule. Also a good document with examples and samples of what other transit agencies do. And sometimes this document's missed, you know, in looking for finding out ways of handling reasonable modification, but it's also a good one for you. And then I have written our NADTC trends report spotlight, which was on the ADA complaint process. This was written a few years ago, but it kind of lays out all those requirements. And I think that's really helpful. These are good resources. And so take advantage of them. And finally, we, as the National Aging and Disability Transportation, is available for you. So find us in different places at our website. Subscribe to our monthly e-news. We're on social media at LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And you can join our mailing list through that QR code right there. And we like to have you be part of our extended group of people who get technical assistance from us. So join us. We'll be there for you. And you can always contact us. This is on our last slide, the NADTC. We have a toll-free hotline number, 866-983-3222. Give us a call. Contact us at contact@nadtc.org. And of course, go to our website, www.nadtc.org, and we'll be there for you. All right, I think we're getting close to the end of time. I thank everyone for participating, for providing those great questions. And still, you know, if you still have questions on this topic or any other around transportation, let us know. Take care and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.